Welcome to the Pivot Clean Energy Podcast, How the World Cooks, the energy shift you need to know about. I'm your host, Alicia El-Mamouni. On this podcast, we are going to explore everything cooking, how it impacts the world, and why you should care. Let's go. Hagan Rose grew up surrounded by agriculture, starting out in a small farm community in central Kentucky, and began his career in biofuels 16 years ago when he joined Eco Energy in 2007. Over these 16 years, he has worked in commercial roles in the bioethanol industry with a concentration on international supply and trade. Today, Hagan is the Director of Sales and Marketing internationally for Eco Energy, a global leader in bioethanol marketing, logistics, and distribution. In this position, he coordinates with EcoEnergy's partner plants and other U.S. producers to supply fuel-grade and industrial-grade bioethanol to buyers around the world. We're going to take some time for a series around how bioethanol is actually made in different parts of the world, because that's a critical piece of transitioning households to bioethanol clean cooking technology. Come along as we listen to Hagan talk about Central and South America and the bioethanol process and feedstocks in that region of the world. We're going to hear about the primary feedstock or base material that bioethanol is made from in South America, a high-level overview of that process, and a little of the history behind why bioethanol has grown so much in the region within the transportation sector. Hagan will provide insight on how that market is starting to change and expand, and also his thoughts on whether bioethanol cooking is a viable and practical option for Central and South America. Come along as we circumnavigate the globe to learn about the renewable fuel that could change how the world cooks. So great to have you on the show, Hagan. Thanks for joining us today.
I really appreciate you all giving me an opportunity to chat with you today. It's a pleasure to be involved with your group.
So How the World Cooks is a podcast about everything that touches on cooking around the world. But in the world of bioethanol cooking, especially, that also has a major feedstock component. And so a lot of our listeners might not be aware of the way that bioethanol is made, how it's used. So we're doing a series of episodes looking at bioethanol production around the world to see what the differences are in South America versus North America, Asia, Africa, Europe, etc. And so that's going to include the various feedstocks and uses, the history behind it. And so you're going to represent the South American bioethanol production for us today. And so we're really looking forward to hearing about that. And I think it will be interesting for a lot of listeners that might not be totally familiar, even if they are in the bioethanol world, with other parts of the world that do this sort of production. So first off, I just want to have you introduce yourself. You are currently the Director of Sales and Marketing for the international markets at Eco Energy. And so can you just first tell us what Eco Energy is?
So Eco Energy is a marketer of biofuels, primarily ethanol. In our nascent stage, as we began, we saw an opportunity to market and provide sales and logistics for ethanol producers in the Midwest. As the RFS began and as mandates were placed, the fuel industry had to understand how to deal with ethanol. So we helped them transition into the E10 blends that we see common in the U.S. today. We've expanded that to Canada, and we built an international division that allows us to send ethanol to other parts of the world for blending as well.
Okay, super. And so you started in the U.S., but what locations are you primarily operating in now?
So we're throughout the U.S., we're throughout Canada. Eco Energy was fortunate to begin marketing for a plant in the Ontario market in 2008. That gave us an opportunity to help build the import structure and to increase the imports to Canada. And now we operate throughout the U.S., East Coast to West Coast in Canada. And then we also supply ethanol to the world through tanks that we hold in Texas. So the Texas Gulf is the primary source of export ethanol for the U.S.
So you're truly a global operation now.
Absolutely.
And what path brought you to Eco Energy? Have you always been in the bioethanol sector, or how did you end up in your current position?
So Eco Energy is based just outside of Nashville, Tennessee. I've been here for about 27 years. I actually moved to Nashville to work with a technology company, and the internet in the late '90s. As I was continuing in that field, frankly, I got to know our founder and original owner, and he kind of pointed out to me that there was not that much difference between biofuels and the internet in the late '90s. Everybody was scared to death of it. Nobody knew what it was, but everybody was going to have to use it. So I realized that wasn't a bad thing to sell in the long run.
That's great. I've never heard that.
I enjoyed Eco Energy in 2007. I mentioned the Canada plant, Integrated Grain Processors
Hmm.
Cooperative in Ontario. Our first real foray into the international markets was marketing in Canada.
Okay.
From there, as the industry grew, production grew as well, and there were opportunities for U.S. ethanol producers to send their material to the world. With that, we worked with producers who saw the advantage and therefore set up the ability to be an exporter. Um, we operate in most markets around the world today in some form. Our material goes to South America, it goes to Asia, goes a large portion goes to India. We've serviced into Korea and China in the past, but our producers in the U.S. are remarkably adept at producing specifications that are used around the world.
Hmm.
We have a very a sophisticated kit for the industry, and we're able to supply those barrels to various markets. So Eco Energy began engaging in that around that same time, around 2009, 2010, and have continued to grow that footprint since.
Okay. And so Eco Energy operates in North America, but it's my understanding you're owned by a parent company in South America, and that's where we're going to focus geographically today. Can you tell us a little bit about that relationship?
Absolutely. In around 2010, Eco Energy was building distribution points in the U.S. Ethanol is produced in the Midwest of the U.S. The populations are more toward the coasts, and the refiners and blenders of gasoline, as ethanol became important to their supply, really didn't have a good way to move that material into the fuel system. So Eco Energy built and developed terminals to land ethanol on the coast, and then put it into make it available for the blenders.
Hmm.
That's an expensive proposition, and it was an opportunity for us to do a capital raise. We looked in the market, and the opportunity arose to work with a group out of Brazil, Copersucar. Copersucar made an investment in Eco. Um, Between the two companies, we became the largest handle for ethanol, the largest marketer of ethanol in the world. Over the course of the next few years, the relationship grew. We realized the synergies were pretty remarkable between the companies, size wise, staff wise, and culture wise. Very, very entrepreneurial, very focused on growing the biofuels market around the world.
Hmm.
Copper Sucre eventually became the full single stakeholder of Eco Energy by about 2014. And
Okay.
obviously, that built a very strong relationship and a connection to South America.
Yeah. So they are now helping to facilitate and grow that global market even more. And I just want to hop back. You mentioned blending. Can you tell our listeners who might not be familiar with how the transportation industry works? What does blending mean when you're talking about fuels?
Absolutely. So ethanol is a blend stock for gasoline today. There are mandates in some markets that require a certain percentage of ethanol to be blended into the fuel to lower GHG. Also, for the fuel blender, it's also used as an octane enhancement. So you go buy gas at your local station, and you have a choice of 87, 89, etc.
Hmm.
With most of the time, gasoline is produced at sub octane, and the ethanol actually adds the octane to make it proper for your vehicle. So it's become a ethanol is the cheapest octane in the world. So it's become a win for the refining community and the blending community, and also for the farmer growing feedstock in the Midwest and the producer in the Midwest.
Hmm.
But the blend itself in the U.S. is typically about 10% ethanol. There are markets that are now blending at 15%, and there are areas where availability of 85% ethanol at E85. So those are
Hmm.
various blends.
Right. Okay. So it's adding the ethanol to your gasoline supply. 10, 15, up to 85% in some cases.
That's correct.
And you're using that as an octane booster. And so that can be a replacement also for certain hydrocarbons that could be also used as octane boosters, but are more harmful for health and for climate.
That's correct. As the world realized some of the risks of some of the octane enhancements that were used prior, and frankly, as the U.S. stopped using MTBE, we saw a remarkable growth in ethanol very quickly.
Hmm. So in South America, um, what are the primary feedstocks that are used to make bioethanol?
So traditionally in South America, it's been a sugarcane ethanol market. So mills produce, they harvest sugarcane, they crush that sugarcane, produce raw sugar and ethanol. So you have two products that are typically supplied, as well as the fiber that's used to power those ethanol plants. So traditionally, it is a sugar market. Over the
Okay.
last 10 to 15 years, Brazil, of course, the largest producer of ethanol in South America, has now grown a corn ethanol industry very similar to what we have in the Midwest of the U.S., frankly, with the
Okay.
same technology, the same type of plants, and the same ethanol and DDGs, distillers' grains, livestock feed as the two primary products. So
Hmm.
that's become a very big growth point in the Brazilian market, and has frankly changed a bit of that the landscape for the Brazilian.
Sure. Yeah, and for those who are unfamiliar with how bioethanol is even produced, can you give a really high level description of how that process works?
It's frankly it's a story as old as time. Um, from Egypt and China, 7,000 BC, we've now found alcohol, beverage alcohol.
Yep.
There's no real difference. I'm originally from Kentucky, so
Okay.
the
Familiar with the
guy
stills.
I'm familiar with the backwoods stills and the bourbon distilleries.
Uh-huh.
There's really no difference other than scale in how this is produced and the level of impurity that you leave in the material. So,
Okay.
an ethanol plant simply takes the starch from a grain in the U.S., or the sugar directly from the cane in Brazil, produces that with uses enzymes to produce alcohol. Distillation allows you to greatly strengthen the proof of that alcohol to make it feasible to use in vehicles, or to make it available for beverage grade or pharmaceutical grades, or other inputs or feedstocks for chemicals. So
Hmm.
very simply, you break down the starch, extract the sugar, or in the case of Brazil, use that sugar to produce an alcohol, and then purify that alcohol to a point where the octane level, where the energy level is sufficient to be able to operate.
Hmm. Okay, so it's basically just what we would associate, you go to the grocery store, you see alcohol for sale. It's just a much higher distilled version of what we're using for transportation
Absolutely,
or other uses.
yeah. Pretty simple process. Again, we do it in a lot of different methods for a lot of different reasons, but it's really the scale that changes when you're doing it for fuel. You're
Hmm.
looking to make a whole lot. It doesn't have to be quite as clean as what we make up in Kentucky.
Sure. Now, South America has historically used bioethanol for decades and at substantial volumes. Can you give a little bit of the history of how that production started or what that looks like today, how it's scaled over
Sure.
the past few decades?
So, sugar was important in South America from the late 1500s, from the time of colonization. By by the 1800s, the first combustion engines actually ran on ethanol, both in the
Mm,
U.S. and Brazil. Um, as the as the as the petroleum industry developed, we switched focus for quite a while, but as we reached a point of concern for energy, as we hit the energy crisis in the 70s, Brazil was a very quick mover. The Pro Alcohol program was introduced, encouraging the use of ethanol for energy security in the mid 1970s. So from the 1970s forward, sugar production increased, ethanol production increased, and they are able to separate themselves from the remarkable import costs of
mm.
hydrocarbon fuel. This continued throughout the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and now is growing again with the advent of corn ethanol in the market.
And so the end uses for bioethanol in South America are primarily going into transportation. Is that correct?
Certainly, but for as we mentioned before, alcohol has a lot of different uses. Ethanol has a lot of purposes around the globe. Certainly, cooking stoves is a great use for this product, but
Yeah.
also pharmaceuticals, chemicals. We mentioned the beverage grades before. So there are multiple uses, solvent uses as well. So the product is used and produced for as a feedstock for various uses in industry.
So then they're using a lot of it in country. How much of that is actually exported as well?
So in South America, the vast majority does stay in the local markets, in the domestic markets.
Okay.
There are some instances where there's export. Peru has some tax advantage to go to Europe. Central American countries have some similar duty benefit and export to go to other markets. For Brazil, about 7% of the material is exported. The rest stays into the local market, either for fuel, chemicals, food use, the pieces that I mentioned before.
Okay.
Brazil has historically been a large producer of higher grades of ethanol, cleaner grades of ethanol. They've always been active in the Japan, Korea lanes for chemical
Hmm.
production, and that's continued. The U.S., Pakistan, um, to a degree, Australia producing some material that now affects that, but Brazil has always held a very strong position in those markets, particularly.
And is that penetration of higher volume ethanol blends on the continent exclusive to Brazil, or do you see that in other parts of South America and Central America? What percentage of other countries in South America are producing, significant volumes or substantial volumes, at least for their region?
Real news. So it's a fair question. Brazil is the largest producer and user of ethanol in South America and Central America. However, most every country has some production. Paraguay, Argentina, I mentioned Peru earlier, Costa Rica, Honduras, Colombia. Um, we find that most markets that have blend requirements or blend incentives have production as well. And certainly, it makes sense. You want to be able to support your own agricultural
Hmm.
industries and find homes for that material. Um, as a rule, the blend is a minimum of 10% throughout South America. We do
Oh,
see some
wow.
variations in that in places. And there are opportunities to blend higher, but as a rule, you're going to see 10%. In Brazil, it's a little different. I mentioned the program that really spurred the blending markets in the 1970s, and Brazil, through their government as well as their industry, have grown a remarkable blend story.
Hmm.
Currently, all standard, quote unquote, standard gasoline in Brazil is 27% ethanol.
Wow.
US, it's about 10%. Most places in the world around 10%, but Brazil's been very aggressive early on. But consider that they sell more neat ethanol, 100% ethanol at the pump than they do gasoline C.
Wow, that's incredible. And they're using that in all their vehicles. I mean, is there
Everything.
restriction? Everything.
The consumer in Brazil over the last many years that they've been blending ethanol now understand the very quickly understand the economics.
Hmm.
Frankly, the story is that the Brazilians will pull up to the pump with a calculator and do the math on energy content versus price and know what the best option is for their particular vehicles on a given day.
Yeah.
But it's a given. You don't consider whether you're using ethanol. It's just how much you're going to put in that day.
Hmm. That's amazing.
It's a good story for sure.
Are there other benefits or co-products that result from the bioethanol production in South America? You mentioned DDGs with the corn production. Are there other?
So I think that's one of the important parts of the fuel ethanol story is that we've heard for 20 years now about food versus fuel. Our industry actually is a food and fuel industry.
Hmm.
I say this for both Brazil and the U.S. In the U.S., I mentioned we provide alcohol for as ethanol for fuel blending, but we also produce the distillers' grains, the animal feeds that are used. The U.S. The world is short protein, short sugar, long starch,
Hmm.
long material. So being able to find ways to produce both sides provides a benefit on in all cases. In Brazil specifically, an ethanol a sugar mill will take cane, crush that cane, use the material that comes out, the juice that comes out for both raw sugar and ethanol production. And frankly, they can dial in the volume between sugar and ethanol to maximize the profit or the margin for that particular facility.
Hmm.
They also produce a bagasse, the fibrous material that's left over from the cane, and that's used to provide power for the sugarcane mills, and also sold back to the grid.
Hmm.
Further, that same bagasse material, the fiber of the sugarcane, is used as a fertilizer. It can be used in wood pulp, so there's nothing wasted in South American ethanol production. The material all has a benefit to the region.
Wow. And so they can get cogeneration of energy from using all of the waste material from the plants after they're processed, and then you're also getting the sugar and the bioethanol from that.
Yeah.
And
And they can
then
sell energy back to the grid.
back to the
Yeah,
grid. Yeah, that's
absolutely.
incredible.
And in a world where hydro based power country like Brazil struggling with drought and El Nino right now,
Hmm.
the opportunity to use that bagasse is only great at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. And then when you look at corn, like you mentioned, you have this high protein animal feed, and the industry is getting very good at finding additional uses through CO2 and corn oil and dry ice and all of these other
Precisely.
additives that they can put into the market. And so that's a really positive thing that we've noticed in the industry as well.
And it is worth mentioning that the corn ethanol industry is growing remarkably in Brazil. The
Hmm.
as certainly north of the traditional center south sugarcane areas, you have huge cropland. In the past, it was simply soybeans, but the the industry, the agro industry, is remarkably adept at finding the best use for their land. They've developed a corn market now, a corn industry, and a corn ethanol industry in order to consume that corn and keep it local.
Wow.
With that, they now use their own, produce their own DDGs. They are able to spin out their own corn oil, which can be used for renewable diesel as a feedstock. So they're able to cover a lot of bases, not only on the sugar side, but also on the
Hmm.
corn side in Brazil and South America.
Yeah, and that really does help provide a buffer and more economic stability when there are global events going on that can disrupt supply chains or cause, prices to go up significantly on certain products. So, um,
It's given Brazil an opportunity with the growth in the industry to be able to support even higher blends.
hmm,
I believe and we believe that Brazil will actually go from a 27% blend to a 30% blend in their primary gasoline C, within the next year. It's
wow.
a big change, and that again supports the local farmers, the farmers in the
Hmm.
region. It supports the industry around ethanol and provides cleaner fuel and cheaper fuel as well. So it's a win.
What do you think the conditions were in South America that really prompted them to promote bioethanol early on in such a big way?
A remarkable, particularly back to Brazil, where I had my most experience. I mentioned before the agro movement, the industry around agriculture has been remarkably successful. They're entrepreneurial. They find ways to make it work. Not
Hmm.
unlike the Midwestern U.S. farmer. Um, South America as a whole has also always lacked refining capacity. We see now a bit more export of crude oil, but refining capacity is always an issue. So they've always been a net importer of fuel and energy in
Okay.
general. So being able to connect the two between the agriculture industry to produce more feedstock and being able to turn up more production of ethanol has been a huge win for years. They saw the opportunity to become more energy independent as
Yeah.
early as the 70s, and they stood by it. Government support both for the development of the production and the industry itself, and for placing those mandates and having aggressive blending targets has been a big piece as well. We see
Hmm.
that all over the world. You need production to some scale in your own market of the fuel of the ethanol in this case. You need support from the government to make sure that you get traction early. And when you
Hmm.
find that, you benefit your agriculture industry, your fuel industry, and the air quality.
Yeah.
Seems like a pretty simple measure.
Win, win, win. Yep.
Exactly.
So, what are some of those things that other regions of the world could learn from bioethanol production in South America? Either countries that already have a bioethanol economy or they're looking to build one. I'm particularly thinking, Africa comes to mind right away
Of
because
course.
you see maybe a similar climate or similar agricultural opportunities. Is there South-South cooperation that could be really helpful there?
So I think you just touched on it. While the feedstocks are in the U.S. and Brazil are very specifically corn and sugar cane, and with some ancillaries. Areas like Africa have opportunities. They have starchy crops. They have grain crops that can be used. They have land.
Hmm.
So developing and finding, and again, I mentioned the model that Brazil laid out and that the U.S. followed to a degree down the road, 20 years later in the early 2000s, building a network, building a system for distribution, and sending the production of that ethanol and the production of that feedstock, and then making sure that it gets into your fuel system provides a remarkable opportunity to do more things with it. It allows for other
Hmm.
industries to grow around it, the
Yeah,
chemical industries. It allows better logistics, which ties directly to what to your group and what you do.
exactly.
When you
Exactly.
find that ethanol is being used in East Africa on more scale, you have more tanks, and then you have more opportunity to land the material that is best used for use. So I
Hmm.
see opportunities around growth in these in South America and in Africa as we continue to see the growth of fuel ethanol. It simply dovetails itself to the ability
Hmm.
to improve cooking equipment and cooking fuels as well.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because we do see a lot of synergy between the transportation market and the cooking market. Because that, when you've got bioethanol in a country or it's being imported, that opens up availability and access for clean cooking operators as well. And it makes the fuel more affordable. You kind of can get a better sense of the quality. It has to meet certain international standards. And so
Precisely.
that provides a lot of great opportunities for cooking operators as well as they're getting started.
And just the comfort level that the comfort level that is now provided to the powers that be in any particular country that ethanol is a viable material. Certainly,
Right.
we have issues in some parts of the world around alcohol laws and the around those pieces. As you move more fuel in, you have more opportunities to use that same feedstock and
Hmm.
that same material for other uses.
Definitely. And so, because the same base fuel can be used for transportation and cooking, do you have a sense of whether bioethanol cooking could expand in a meaningful way in South or Central America? Or do you feel like they have the clean energy solutions they need and it might not really expand there?
So, I'll tell you a brief story to give some color around that. Through my university, I spent a lot of time in Western South America in the mountains, and it was uncanny. I would be traveling, get hung up in a landslide, and pretty common the road get closed. But
Hmm.
every time it happened, within about 2 hours, there was someone set up with a cooking area and setting up shop to be able to take care of the people who are going to be sitting
Hmm.
there for a while. And I
Yep.
can still vividly remember them coming in and building their wood fires
Yeah.
immediately. I saw this recently again in Africa. I was recently in West Africa, and the scale of wood fired cooking is remarkable.
Hmm.
I think that I see that opportunity to grow with the distribution of equipment to find an opportunity to lower the risk for those who are doing that every day in home or just out on the side of the road where it gets
Hmm.
closed down. I think that the opportunity is remarkable, and as I look at it, not only for the health of the families who are doing their cooking, but also for the climate. I mean, it's a
Yeah.
huge piece of the GHG savings as we expand as you expand ethanol cooking is truly the story in the end.
Yeah, and when you see that combination of bioethanol in transportation fuel and used for cooking, that really exponentially grows the impact you can have on carbon emissions and public health and environmental concerns. It really helps expand the impact that can happen when you couple those two things.
Absolutely, it's an exciting time, and I think it's important to also mention that ethanol, particularly, it's getting cleaner every day.
Yeah.
We're doing more. We're improving yields for the feedstock. We're lowering the use of water for growing those feedstocks.
Yeah.
Our kit itself, the industry, is becoming more and more cognizant of the carbon emission and lowering that footprint every day. We will have net zero ethanol is real. We will see that in the near future, and being able to
Mhm.
provide that and use that in place of the current feedstock for cooking,
Yeah.
it's a blessing.
Yeah. Truly a renewable, sustainable fuel option.
Absolutely,
Yeah, and it makes sense to look to expand that in South America because the fuel is already there. You already can access bioethanol quite easily in most of the continent. And
absolutely.
so being able to get the technology in place, it could really take off quickly because the fuel is already there.
I One of my good friend's sons is currently doing some work in Kenya. He actually called me to point out the benefit that he sees already after just a few months of those who have access to ethanol cooking stoves.
Yeah,
It works in the field. These people
it
see
does.
this. They know that they see the advantage. But it's just a matter of getting a bit more foothold and spreading this quicker.
Yeah, accessible and affordable energy.
Precisely.
Absolutely. Well, we talked about bioethanol in a pretty general sense. And so I really appreciate you providing some foundational knowledge for our listeners. But as this is a podcast that does relate back to cooking, and since we're close to the holiday season, what is your favorite holiday meal to either eat or make?
Oh, I was very lucky. I mentioned I grew up on a small farm in Kentucky, and my mother was a remarkable, not the typical Kentucky cook. She was a bit more exotic. So for Christmas, my mother would put together the traditional country ham, salt cured ham, and turkey, and all the sides. But she would also make everyone's favorite dish.
Oh, wow.
So it was quite the event every year, and as again as I was kind of landlocked in Kentucky, I always asked her to make me some type of seafood. So there
Oh,
was crab or scallops on the menu for me, and I've never been able to do it quite as well as she has, but I haven't given up trying.
you were the difficult child asking for the
That's
seafood.
There you go. She would have told you that a lot of the time. That's a fair point. But those are some of my fond memories of growing up
Right.
back in Kentucky.
Wonderful. Well, hopefully you can enjoy some well, this month. It's already
That's right.
December.
We're
Hopefully you can
already
enjoy
here.
some this month.
Well, I hope you have a great holiday as well.
Thank you. We really appreciate you sharing your expertise today, Hagan. And it was a delight to talk to you and learn a little bit more about biofuels in South America.
I really appreciate the time, and I have such great respect for the work that you all are doing. It's a pleasure to take part in your event today.
Thanks so much.
Thanks.
Thank you so much for listening. With over a third of the world's population lacking access to modern solutions and cooking with solid and polluting fuels like wood, charcoal, and kerosene, there are huge global impacts in multiple sectors. Pivot is passionate about opening access to household energy options around the world that also lead to reduced emissions, improved health outcomes, environmental protection, greater purchasing power, gender equity, and so much more. Join us for these personal conversations with farmers, fuel producers, distributors, stove manufacturers, policymakers, and consumers to learn about the dynamics that influence how people cook around the world. Please reach out to us at hello@pivotcleanenergy.org to find out how you can get involved. And we'd also be grateful if you found this information valuable and pass it along to friends, family, colleagues, your mailman, your grocer, anyone you know, and find some way to engage. Don't forget to follow us on our social media accounts like LinkedIn and Twitter. Check out our website at pivotcleanenergy.org. And of course, follow us on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts so you can catch the next episode when it drops.